Old age security is a critical pillar of the Canadian retirement income system and our social safety net. It forms the base of income for millions of Canadian retirees. Despite its importance, in many cases it forms a relatively small part of monthly income when compared to Canada Pension Plan, private pensions, withdrawals from investment accounts, and employment. And since it's an income-tested benefit, many higher income retirees may receive a reduced amount of old age security or possibly none at all. For these reasons, in many cases, it drops down the priority list of many retirees when they plan their retirement income. Nevertheless, there are still some significant planning opportunities available to maximize your old age security benefit. And when I thought about who the best person to help us learn these strategies would be, Hector jumped to the top of my mind. Aaron is a private wealth advisor at CWB Wealth based out of Calgary, Alberta. Aaron is one of the preeminent financial advisors in Canada, and his written work on old age security, estate planning, and tax planning forms some of the best insights available in these planning areas for Canadians. I asked Aaron to help me with this video, and I was so glad when he agreed to do it. In the video, we talk about eligibility for the old age security benefit, how timing when you begin collecting old age security can impact your benefit, how OAS Clawback works, and opportunities for even high income retirees to collect some OAS benefit even though they may otherwise be ineligible due to persistently high income throughout retirement. The video includes visuals from an OAS calculator that Aaron uses with his clients, and they really help clarify the importance of making a good OAS decision for your retirement. And with that, I'll take you to my interview with Aaron Hector.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So for the viewer, there's a lot of topics that I've kind of spanned on the channel over the past couple of years, but not a ton on old age security. And in some ways, old age security is a simpler retirement income benefit, but there are still some complexities to it and good planning that can be done to make sure that the retiree is maximizing it for their use. And the way that I actually met Aaron or found Aaron was through an excellent piece of work that he did looking at old age security strategies for people that are in a high income situation in retirement. And between that and then meeting Aaron through the Financial Planning Association of Canada, of which we're both a member, which is an organization that promotes like financial planning and professionalism across the financial planning profession in Canada, I've gotten to know Aaron, and he's been so generous with his time and his insights. He thinks so deeply about tax and retirement planning topics. And he's been like a huge help for me and somebody that I've looked up to for a number of years. So when I thought about putting something together for old age security, I thought it would be great if I could get you to come on and talk about it, Aaron. So thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for that, Mark. And it's been great getting to meet you and know you as well. And I would say that some of the content that you're putting out online, I've been watching and very interested as well. So thanks for your contributions to the Canadian marketplace as well. The more good information collectively that we can all put out there, we're just trying to help people, right?
Can you do a brief intro, Aaron, on like your role and what you do every day?
Sure. So my title is called a private wealth advisor, and I work with Canadian Western Bank's Wealth Management Division, so CWB Wealth. So private wealth advisor, that basically means that I'm a financial planner serving mostly long-term clients who have an ongoing relationship with our company. We do also the occasional financial plan on a fee-for-service basis. It's more of a one-time engagement, so I do that work as well. But most of my day is spent with clients who I've been working with for years and years and years. We kind of have the full suite of offerings where we manage people's investments, we do their financial planning, we actually do their tax returns as well, which is somewhat unique for our company, and really just trying to take care of our clients as best be. So I would be very central to our financial planning, tax and estate planning, retirement planning, that side of the equation. And I would work in a team environment with other professionals who are hands-on with the investments.
Can you talk a little bit about what drew you into digging into the topic of old age security?
So I guess, first of all, my clientele typically is more in the mass affluent to higher net worth. I've got a few substantial net worth clients as well. And so I'm always kind of thinking at things as a financial planner through that lens of people who tend to have higher incomes than average, higher net worths than average. And so as I'm thinking through topics, I'm always trying to relate back to how is this going to help my clientele. And I had observed through a very specific specific client situation that came up that there was not a lot of information available online with respect to planning ideas for people who are at the higher end of the income and net worth category in Canada. A lot of the materials out there are written for everyday, normal Canadians or lower income Canadians, which is fine. But I felt like the piece that was more relevant to my clientele was missing from the Canadian news, essentially. So I had a client situation where the husband was deferring his old age security. You haven't always had that option, first of all. It's only been maybe 8 or 9 or so years since you've been able to postpone beyond age 65. You never used to have the enhancement that you have now for delaying. I'm just trying to kind of level set the timelines here. So he was planning to defer to take advantage of the deferral enhancements. And then partway into that timeline, got sick suddenly. And within a few months of the diagnosis, he's gone. So I was working with the widow and really trying to identify if there was anything that we could do in that moment to get back some of the old age security that they would have been receiving had he applied at 65. And that's where I just was coming up empty. Everywhere I looked, I couldn't really figure anything out. I went to a couple of discussion forums that I was part of. FPAC wasn't around at that time. That would have been a good option for me to reach out to. But I was part of a couple other really good forums where people are happy to exchange ideas. And I asked the question there. I didn't get anything back. No one really knew what could or couldn't be done. But I did get connected to Doug Runchy. Doug is now retired, but at the time active pension consultant, who in my mind is like the top guy in Canada around Canada pension plan and really knows old age security as well. So I reached out and I asked him, and he was able to direct me to an area within the OAS Act that explained what the options were. And turned out through this investigation that my surviving widow client as executor would be able to actually apply for old age security on behalf of her deceased husband and reach back and get 1 year of payment. So not going all the way back to 65, but if he passed away at 68, he could get the payment from age 67 to 68, or she could as executor. So it was kind of just that discovery process that really got me interested in old age security. The other thing that I had kind of anecdotally noticed doing tax returns for some clients is that, and this wasn't necessarily through like a classic deferral situation where someone has made the decision to defer their OAS, but even someone who's applying at 65, sometimes the application just doesn't get processed right away. It takes months before you start to see your first payment. And so I had another situation with a client where that first year's payment didn't start until the following calendar year. So it might have been for, say, October, November, December, and then the full next year, January through December, all of that was received in the year after the application. Okay. And then because we actually filed tax returns for our clients as well, when we were doing the tax return the following year, I just noticed, and I was following through the calculations in the tax schedules, that if you had a larger base level of OAS income that exceeded the standard amount for an age 60 application, they had the ability to earn a higher and higher level of income before the full amount would be fully clawed back. So it's just kind of a matter of, unique client situations that led me on a discovery process. And then just, I think, paying attention to this tax side of how the clawback actually operates and the math around that just led me to thinking about things a little differently than I think had up until that point garnered much attention. And so I decided I would write about it because there was virtually nothing that I could find online that would substantiate any of these claims. If you go to the government website, they didn't say anything about how any of this would work. And so I wrote that piece. There was a couple pieces I wrote around the same time. The one with some of these kind of unique strategies that I know we'll probably talk about a little more in the call. I just decided that I would write it, even though I couldn't substantiate it by reading other materials. So I wrote those pieces with a bit of a preamble to say, this hasn't been tested yet, but there's no reason why it shouldn't work. So,
is that article still posted somewhere? The reason that I'm smiling and nodding is because I remember that first line from that article, it was like, I've searched high and low for something written on this topic of what I'm about to tell you, but I can't find it. And like that opening to that article, I remember first reading it being like, oh, this is going to be really
Well, and like, you understand compliance and what it takes to get different thoughts into a published article. And I think my compliance team was pretty good to let me publish that at the time too, because there were no sources that I could quote to say someone else had written about this before me. And I'm kind of just taking my own take on a previous person's writing. I just had to put myself out there, and they were okay with it, but they did put a disclaimer at the bottom as well.
Because they have to.
Because they have to. Yeah. I was happy that we were able to actually publish it.
The writing is great. And another thing that you've taught me through like knowing you for a couple of years is like you can't be afraid to dig into the act. Like you can't be afraid to roll up your sleeves and look at the source material. Like go onto the Canada website, read the original stuff, right? Like we can't just rely on what's on, advisor blogs. And that's not to take away from good advisors doing good research. You got to kind of do your own work, a lot of these things, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what makes old age security unique to Canada Pension Plan? And I'll set this question up. Like there's a lot online about strategies around Canada Pension Plan.
Yep.
Can you talk about some things that make old age security different and unique, and why they create sort of unique planning opportunities for retirees?
So in a general sense, they're quite similar. They're government pensions that are inflation adjusted, but that, honestly, that's kind of where it ends, because how you are eligible is different. So with CPP, it's based off your lifetime earnings. As you earn income as an employee, you have contributions that you need to make into the Canada Pension Plan, and then your employer matches those contributions as well. So that's a contributory structure. If you have never worked a day of your life, you will not have any CPP to receive in your retirement because you've put nothing into it. Old age security is very different, where it's based off of residency. So if you lived in Canada after the age 18 for at least 10 years, you're going to get something out of old age security. 10 years is the minimum required residency period. You need to have 40 years of adult residency to max out your old age security. And that's all after age 18. So one is based off of your earnings. The other is based off of where you've physically resided. The other differences, I guess, would be CPP is available as early as age 60, whereas with old age security, you can't apply until you're 65. But with both, you can postpone to 70. And for each month after age 65, you actually get an additional bonus payment, call it, an enhanced pension at the time that you actually choose to start them. And with old age security and CPP, it's a little different how the math works on that too. So you get a little bit larger benefit for deferring your CPP. You get 0.7% for each month. Whereas with old age security, you only get 0.6. So if you did defer out to as late as 70, under the old age security rules, you'd get 136% of the amount that someone who started at 65 would be receiving. With CPP, you'd get up to 142% instead of 136 if you waited to age 70. So you could look at that and say there's a larger incentive to postponing CPP than OAS, and that would be true. A lot of the conversational points as to what scenarios would make it so that you would want to postpone, I think, are very much aligned with both old age security and Canada Pension Plan. The other very significant difference, Canada Pension Plan, once you're receiving it, you get it. They're not going to claw it back if you have a very large income. Whereas with old age security, once your net income exceeds a certain threshold, which is set every year, it's an index threshold, you start to lose it. So with CPP, there's no risk of clawback. With old age security, if your income's high enough, you could get nothing on a year-by-year basis. It's looked at. So that's an important consideration as well. That's quite different than CPP.
And we're going to get into some of those details, like as we kind of move through the video, but that is a very unique, I would say, playing field that we have to be mindful of, like is income in retirement and what the impact's going to be to old age security, especially for higher income retirees.
Yeah, for sure.
If somebody wants to figure out how much old age security they're going to get, and now we're thinking about somebody who maybe hasn't lived in Canada their whole life, leading up to their retirement date, is there somewhere online like Service Canada where they could go and determine how much they're going to get, or is it they find it at the time of application?
There is a website with a calculator where you put in your residency history and it'll spit out like a calculation, an estimate for you. So that's available. Another way to think it through, which is I think just as easy if you're okay with like grade 6 math. If you know what the current going payment rate is, if you qualify for the full amount, so like right now it's $713 a month. That's for the people who have 40 years of residency after age 18. It's a very simple mathematical exercise. So if you've only lived in Canada for 20 of those 40 years, you'd get half. So for every year, it's 1/40th. So if you've lived 35 years after age 18, you get 35/40ths of that regular payment that's posted online. So that's, I think, just as quick as inputting all the calculations and everything. As long as you know how long you've been a resident in Canada, you should be able to figure it out pretty easily.
And I'm sure I've asked you this question before, Aaron, but what happens, I don't think it happens very often, but what happens if you forget to apply? Like if you just sort of, it slips your mind, like how does that work for somebody who says, hey, I'm now 70 and I've never even thought to apply? Like, will I be prompted somehow by Service Canada?
So my understanding is that in the year before you turn 65, it's common for people to be automatically enrolled. So now this is for, call it, simple situations. So if someone was born in Canada, lived in Canada their whole life, never left, and now they're 64 years old, and you've been filing tax returns, the whole way along. So CRA and Service Canada knows your full history. You'll be automatically enrolled. You'll get a letter sometime in your 64th year saying you've been automatically enrolled. Your OAS will start at age 65, and you don't need to do anything if you're okay with that. Now, if you do want to postpone, you have to notify Service Canada that you don't want it to start at 65. So that would actually be the action point to stop it as opposed to starting it. But the automatic enrollment doesn't happen for everyone. So if you have had periods of time where you left Canada and then you came back, or you were born somewhere else and you came here, odds are you're not going to be automatically enrolled. You're going to have to apply, and through the application process, that's when you actually kind of are given the opportunity to explain to Service Canada of your timelines and when you were in Canada and whatnot. You might need to actually provide supporting documentation, like a landing document to substantiate some of the dates that you put into your application. But let's say someone didn't get automatically enrolled, they're 70 or older. They would have to then be the ones to take charge and send in an application, either the paper application, or today, what's probably easier for most is to go through Service Canada's website. So just like CRA has an online portal to look at your tax documents, Service Canada has a very similar online portal for all your kind of CPP and OAS information, and you can apply online right there. But you need to register for an account to be able to get access to that site. And if you never have before, it could take, a week to 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, because it's a 2-part registration process where you first apply for your account, and then it kind of sits there in abeyance as they physically mail you a code, which will be mailed to your official address on file where you said you were resident on your last tax return. You get that code in the mail, and then you use that to finalize your application. Once you have that, you can go online and you can apply.
And in the event that you're in a situation where someone is kind of post 70, maybe even a couple of years past 70, is there a maximum number of years that they'll pay back, or they'll pay you in arrears? Is it limited? I think
it's always just 1 year. So if you wait to 70 or to 75 and say, oh, geez, I screwed up here, I want to apply back to age 70. No, they'll only let you go back 1 year.
Wow. Okay. Good to know. And again, this is like the most corner case. Like, how many people are not hunting down that old age security check? Probably not that many, but I guess there probably are some people out there. I would imagine at least a few, right?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people who have very high incomes in retirement, they don't apply because they figure they're not going to get anything out of it anyways. And what's the point of every single year receiving your T4A old age security slip that just reports income with a 100% clawback? And then you have to put it on your tax return, even though it ends up being a nothing. It becomes almost burdensome if that's the situation you're in. I mean, not too many Canadians are in that situation, but it can happen.
So why don't we do this? Let's jump into some of the details around these strategies for people who are in a high income situation in retirement. Talk us through some of the strategies you've created for high income retirees, who may otherwise not be eligible for OAS or who are facing old age security clawbacks.
Sure. So I'll start with one that I think is going to be really quite relevant for most people. And it's the idea of shifting your very first year of old age security income potentially into the year after you retire. So age 65 is still kind of the standard retirement age for Canadians. So let's assume someone is working in their salaried position making $100,000 per year, and they have a birthday that's November. They turn 65 in November, let's say, or 66. It honestly doesn't really matter as long as they're older than 65. The point being, their current income through employment would put them into the clawback area. So what I mean by that is there's a threshold each year that's set by the government where you start to lose access to your old age security if your income exceeds it. So for 2024, that limit is $90,997. And if your income is over that, for every dollar that you're over, you'll lose 15 cents of your old age security. So for someone who has $100,000 of salary and they turn 65 in that year and they're retiring, they might have it in their head that they really want to apply at 65 for old age security. They understand the deferrals and everything else, but they figure they're a bird in the hand kind of person and they just want it. Now, should they apply at age 65, even though they're still working for the majority of that year? Maybe not. Like if they're retiring in November, they probably want to wait until the following year and then base their application on age 65, which was in the prior year. So still starting when they want to start, but because they've applied in the following year with the request for the retroactive payment going backwards, they've essentially shifted any OAS that they would have otherwise received in that first year into the second year. And the beauty of that is now they're retired in the second year, and your old age security test, like the income test, is based off of the year that you actually receive the payment, not necessarily the year that it applies to. So it's just a way in that front end of your application to shift certain months of payments into the following year and still allowing you to start kind of when you want to start, but just being very strategic because of the employment income you still had in the year up until your retirement date. So that's the first kind of tool that I think is really relevant to a lot of people in that first year. Do you want the first year's payments to hit you in year one or year two? Essentially. Now, then you can talk about the retirees who just day-to-day normal retirement years are going to be high income retirees that are going to be subject to old age security clawback. So first of all, if you run your financial projections and you're forecasted to have retirement income of $75,000 per year most years, none of this really applies to you because you're not going to be exposed to clawback anyways. But some people have very large pensions, or they have significant savings in RIF accounts, which are eventually going to pay out taxable withdrawals, or they've got large non-registered accounts that pay dividends and capital gains and things like that. They might be at a point where their retirement plan shows that their annual regular year of retirement, their income might be, say, $125,000. So for them, they're going to have, or they would expect that a good portion of their old age security is going to be clawed back on a regular year. So then you look at it and say, if they're in that situation, should they apply at 65 or should they consider postponing to as late as 70? And if you think about it, the way that the math works on clawback, there's sort of this range. So if you start at age 65, you're going to start being clawed back. The lower clawback floor would be like $90,997, I already mentioned. Based off of the numbers we know as of today's call, you'd be fully clawed back at about $148,000. So if you're at 125, you basically lost the part of your OAS that would be related from like 91,000 to 125. And you'd only have the OAS that's from 125 to 148 on the clawback scale if you start at 65. If you were to defer to age 70, now all of a sudden you have a much larger base of OAS income. So instead of about 8,500 of annual OAS income for starting at 65, you now have 11,600 or so if you're waiting to age 70. Because of the math of how the clawback works, your upper end of that clawback range is no longer 148. It's now close to 170,000. It's like 168, 169. So now that person who has a retirement income of 125,000 per year, they now have from 125 to 69 of available OAS that's not clawed back. It's a much larger portion than the person who starts at 65 and has 125 to 140.
Yeah.
So for people who have very high retirement incomes, deferral makes even way more sense than for those who aren't subject to clawback. It's really quite interesting how this works.
Yeah.
And the visuals that will be on the screen are going to really show you very clearly how that becomes a more optimal decision point for those who have high retirement incomes. And then you could even say, what if it's not 125? What if it's 145 or 150? Or, you can keep going, and it becomes that much more clear how valuable deferral is for high income retirees. So pretty cool stuff, really. I think it's cool.
It's awesome when you see Aaron's visual and how he's laid it out. It's clear, like, oh, okay, the decision between just simply taking it when I'm supposed to get it at 65 and waiting even just a couple of years could mean thousands of dollars in benefit that I otherwise would forego if I just thought about it a little bit more intentionally, right?
One of my favorite sound bites that I say is, with CPP, we don't know for sure, when the right time will be until you die. But there's a range of reasonable decisions, I think, that someone could make around Canada Pension Plan. With old age security, you can make a very distinctly wrong decision. If you're a high income retiree, you could just make just a bad decision, and as a result, you get nothing. With CPP, even if you make a bad decision, because there's no clawback, you're still going to get it. But with OAS, you just might not get anything if you make the wrong decision. So anyways, just kind of interesting to think about it that way.
What about a retiree who, for whatever reason, they're just always going to be maximum clawed back, like they're not going to get any old age security? Is there any strategies that are out there for them?
So there's two more further out there strategies, I guess you could call it. One relates back to your application and how you structure your application. So let's say I referred to the upper clawback ceiling for a person who applies at age 70 being 169 or so thousand. What if your regular retirement income is 200? You're even going to be clawed back at the thresholds that are put on you by applying at age 70. Now, you do maybe have a one-time shot here. So if you wait to age 71 and then apply, and when you apply, you do it under that 1 year retroactive reach back way of doing that. As mentioned earlier, if you're applying at the end of the year, because it takes months for this to actually be processed by the government before you get your first payment, you could apply in, say, December of when you're 71 and say on your application, I want to effectively start my OAS a year ago. So what'll happen, they'll eventually approve it and you'll get a lump sum payment for the prior year in maybe February. I'm not sure exactly what the processing times are, but sometime early in the following year, you would get that lump sum, and then you would get the regular monthly payments for the rest of the year as well. So in that first year, you'll get 2 times what the age 70 payment amount would be. So you're talking about $23,000 of OAS in that first year of application. And then the same math on the clawback ceiling applies. So it takes a long time at 15 cents per dollar to fully erode $23,000. So now you'd have what I call a super ceiling of, you can only do the super ceiling once when you apply, but now your upper clawback threshold is going to be close to $250,000. So for someone who's at that kind of snap bracket, a one-time chance to keep something. Now, it's not going to be a whole lot, in particular for someone who's in that situation, but it's something. And I think you can debate the ethical merits of who would want to do that and whether they should and all that. I think those are reasonable conversations to have, but I also think that Canadians should be able to position their finances and make decisions based off of understanding the rules that are available to them and just kind of how it works. So that's kind of how I think about it. So that's a one-time shot opportunity for someone. But now to your question, what if someone has income that even exceeds that? So let's say they have like $250,000 plus of regular retirement income, which some people do. Even the super ceiling concept will result in a full clawback. Those people really should never apply for OAS. Doing so is just going to cause annoying paperwork and tax situations and probably just piss them off every time they file their tax returns because they see it being fully clawed back all the time. But there's another one-time opportunity here. But unfortunately, the person we're talking about would have to pass away for that to become an option. And it kind of, again, goes back to my original client situation where someone passed away. And this is what we had to do with them, even though they weren't necessarily in this income bracket or anything, but the concept still applies. So an executor is able to apply on behalf of the deceased person to start their OAS after they passed away. And that 1 year reach back opportunity still is available, but payments stop on death. So that it's only that 1 year reach back that we're talking about. So the year prior to death here is the period of time that we're talking about getting old age security payments for. And it kind of gets technical on the tax side of things, but after you pass away, there's a couple optional tax returns that you can file. Mm-hmm. And one of these optional tax returns is called a rights or things return. And essentially what would fall onto a rights or things filing would be income payments that were owed to you on the day you died, but were not actually received until after your date of death. Common things here would be like, that last pension payment that if you died on the 4th of the month and the payment came out on the 15th of the month, things like that. If you're an owner of a stock that pays a dividend and your ex-dividend date has passed, so you're owed a dividend, but that hasn't been paid yet, that would go on a rights or things return. And because of the nature of this OAS application, you're owed that money, but you haven't received it yet until after your death. So if you're over 70, there's 11,600 or so, that would fall into a rights or things return. Yeah. And even if that person who passed away is a very high income person, there's probably not a lot of income that lands on the rights or things. And therefore, you get 1 year of payment without clawback, and it's that much more money that could be distributed to the survivors of this person. So I think it's something that really should be on the checklist of every law office out there. Every executor's guide should have this as something that they should check off their list. Has the person applied for OAS? And it doesn't even have to be for these really high income people. It's for anyone who has deferred their OAS. That should be part of their estate planning checklist to say if they were deferring and they hadn't yet applied, the executor should get that 1 year for sure. And it's even, depending on how you want to look at it, it could be like CPP death benefit kind of way of looking at things. Like with Canada Pension Plan, you get $2,500 death benefit. With OAS, you don't get a death benefit. But if you were deferring, you kind of look at this as though if the executor is willing to fill out a couple forms, there's an additional death benefit there from OAS if they weren't already a recipient and they were older than 65. I kicked this around with a really good estate lawyer here in Calgary, and I was asking, should this go in the will, or like, how do you tell an executor that this is something that they should be thinking about? So the advice was to not put it in the will because it gets quite rigid in that situation. But they suggested like a letter of wishes. Lots of people will provide a letter to my future executor. These are my values and these are the things I'd like you to consider. So that would be a perfect place to put this. It's just, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Executor, I'm deciding to postpone my OAS. If something happens to me before I apply, you should know that you can reach back and get this 1 year.
That's awesome. It's such a good idea. And it's like you said, it's not maybe going to change the financial picture for the heirs, but it's one more thing and it helps, right? Like it's one additional thing that they can get that they're entitled to as being Canadian and living here for as long as they have. At least know that that tool is there and how to access it, right?
Totally. And if you are at that high income level and you've got kind of moral or ethical dilemmas around whether or not you should apply, maybe you apply and then take that money and you give it to a good charity. You can still direct funds to support really good causes, and you don't necessarily have to keep the money yourself either. So just another thought.
Like now that we're talking about letter of wishes like that, you could even include that. I never applied for OAS. I don't really need it, but it's going to be a few $1,000s that otherwise would just stay somewhere else with the government. Why don't we take it and give it to the charity that we all love so much, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Aaron, is there any more that you want to share? This has been fantastic. Are there any other strategies that you want to talk about today?
One thing we haven't talked about yet, which it'd be a miss if we didn't at least briefly touch on it. So quite recently, the government has added an enhancement for age 75 and over recipients. So there's nothing anyone needs to do as an action point, but once you're 75, you will start to get an extra 10% per month more than you had previously been receiving. So welcome change, I'm sure, for older retirees, that they're getting a little bit extra. That, by virtue of having a 10% additional payment, will have an impact on that upper clawback ceiling as well. So people who are 75 and over can bring forward more income and still not be fully clawed back compared to someone who's under 75. So just a little subtle planning point to think about. If someone really wanted to juice the super ceiling concept, maybe now they don't wait to 71 to apply, they wait to 76 and then juice it because of that extra 10%. Those are super minor details, but things that people might want to think about as well. That's about it though.
It was on my list of questions, and maybe now's a good time to ask. Sometimes I will get some pushback around OAS timing. People will ask, well, what if it's going away? Why don't I take it? Because you never know, it could go away.
I would say I understand the concern because OAS payments are paid out of general revenue, right? It's not like there's a separate fund for OAS. It's not based off of people's contributions like Canada Pension Plan, where your contributions go into the fund and it's invested and you can actually see what's there. So for that reason, I would say I understand the concern. I personally do not feel a ton of risk because it's such an important pillar of the Canadian landscape. I can't imagine a government taking it away. Like, look what's happened recently. It's been enhanced, right? So it's going the other direction as opposed to it's going on the side of making it larger as opposed to taking it away. You know, at some point in the future, who knows, right? Like there's no way to guarantee that it will always be there, but I'm not concerned. I think it would be absolute political suicide to take it away. And also you kind of have to look at other countries around the world and what are their retirement pillars and comparing and contrasting. So, you know, you look to the US and they have their Social Security program, which is quite different than ours. We have CPP, old age security, and then GIS is kind of the very low income supplement. In the US, they've got Social Security, which if you are making a lot of money during your employment, it actually provides a much more generous income replacement in retirement, but the contributions are larger as well. When you kind of compare the two countries side by side, if we were to all of a sudden take OAS out of the equation, it wouldn't even be close. And I think it'd be too different of an income replacement for retirees in one country versus the other that there'd be just so much uproar. Although it's not guaranteed forever because it does just come out of general revenue and the government of the day potentially can tweak things and change the rules. I just am not myself worried about it. What do you think?
I just say, you know, it's an income tested benefit. It forms a foundation of so many retirees' income, especially people on lower incomes. I could see there being tweaks. Like you said, the old age security claiming age was moved in the previous government up to 67 or back to 67, however you want to look at it. And then it was then moved again. I could see little things like that happening, but the idea that people collecting old age security are all of a sudden going to have the rug pulled out from under them entirely. It's the same way, like I can't guarantee the sun's going to come up tomorrow, but I feel pretty confident it's going to. Like I kind of would put OAS in that same bucket. Like I'm not sure that it's going to always be there, but I'm pretty darn sure that it's not going to change dramatically, right?
Yeah, exactly. Same.
Aaron, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. It's a fun conversation. Happy to come back and talk about something else sometime too. So let me know.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Aaron Hector about old age security strategies. If you have any questions for Aaron or for me, please leave them in the comment section below. I've included a link to follow Aaron Hector on Twitter, which I highly recommend you do. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak with you soon. Take care.